The Jones family lived in the quiet Scottish village of East House. The parents, James and Judith, worked at the local branch of Royal Mail and raised 3 children. The youngest was Jody, born in 1989. From an early age, the girl was distinguished by her remarkable intelligence, endurance, and high ambitions. She had a talent for drawing and writing poetry, and the school principal predicted a brilliant and successful future for Jody. However, a sudden tragedy changed the fate of the Jones family forever. When Jody was 9, her father, who had long suffered from mental illness, committed suicide. This event was a devastating blow to the entire family. The mother had to quit her job to take care of the 3 children alone. The eldest daughter, Janine, took the loss the hardest and was sent to live with her grandmother for a while. For little Jody, it was another pain, because her sister was the closest person to her, the only one she trusted with her innermost secrets. Over time, Jody began to change rapidly. She dyed her hair bright colors, became interested in punk and metal music, and by the time she was 14, she was already abusing marijuana and alcohol. In those years, the goth movement, a group of gloomy young men and women fascinated by the themes of tragedy and death, was gaining popularity among teenagers. For a child who had experienced the loss of her father, this subculture seemed very attractive. Moreover, Jody began to self-harm. It is no coincidence that it was in this environment that she met a kindred spirit. Luke Mitchell was a year older than Jody and also the youngest in the family. However, unlike his beloved, he seemed to have no obvious reasons for such deviant behavior. When the boy was 11, his parents divorced, but his mother successfully raised her 2 sons, providing them with fairly comfortable living conditions. Luke attended a Catholic school and was considered a friendly, neatly dressed young man. He was interested in military history, equestrian sports, and motorcycles, and was a typical middle-class boy. However, at the age of 13, he began to undergo a striking metamorphosis. Luke radically changed his appearance and outlook. He let go of his long hair, completely renewed his wardrobe, preferring black clothes, where a long cloak became an integral attribute. He became interested in heavy metal, rock, as well as Satanism, and everything related to it. His idol was the shocking musician Miley Manson, whose work still causes a lot of controversy. Along with the change in his image, his school performance deteriorated. He began to have constant fights and other disciplinary problems, as well as drug abuse. Luke smoked marijuana several times a day for a whole year, even during and after school. An integral part of his new image was dark brooding and intimidating his classmates with horror stories, which sometimes escalated into outright threats. He once told a classmate that he wanted to get high and kill someone, then pulled out a knife and added that he knew the best way to cut someone's throat. Unfortunately, the person he was talking to did not take these words well. Luke's metamorphosis did not go unnoticed by his teachers. In his school essays, he increasingly wrote about violence and the worship of Satan. An integral part of his new image was dark musings and intimidation of his classmates with horror stories, which sometimes turned into outright threats. He once told a classmate that he wanted to get high and kill someone, then pulled out a knife and added that he knew the best way to cut someone's throat. Unfortunately, the person he was talking to did not take these words well. Luke's metamorphosis did not go unnoticed by his teachers. In his school essays, he increasingly wrote about violence and Satan worship. In one of them, the young man doubted the existence of God and said that people needed Satan for balance. In addition, the teenager's textbooks and notebooks were filled with brutal drawings depicting satanic symbols and the like. The worried teacher turned to the school psychologist for help, but apparently in vain, because in his next essay, Luke wrote that he was being imposed on by a psychopathic teacher and sent to a psychiatrist simply for being tougher and more strict than others. At the same time, he emphasized that the decision to follow the teachings of Satan does not necessarily mean that psychiatric intervention is needed. In early 2003, 2 tormented hearts finally found each other. Luke Mitchell and Jody Jones began dating. For the girl, this relationship clearly meant much more. Luke became her first lover, her first boyfriend, and soon, her first sexual experience. Sometime in late spring or early summer, Jody wrote in her personal diary that her feelings for Luke were not just a teenage crush, but true love. She admitted that she would die for him if he asked. She emphasized his tenderness and how he comforts her when she cries. She cited her willingness to believe everything he says. This is how the young girl described her emotions. Luke Mitchell, however, felt nothing of the sort. At the same time, he was dating another girl. And believe me, she was destined to experience something much more horrific than the disclosure of infidelity. In early 2003, Jody's mother found out that her daughter was using drugs and forbade her to meet with her friends, especially a young man she had never suspected existed in her life. Only Janine's older sister knew about Luke and eventually told her mother. Her house arrest ended on June 30th, and Jody, of course, arranged a date with her lover by sending him a message. Their special place was the Roman Road, a path through the woods that connected the girl's house with Luke's. A little after 5 in the evening, Jody announced that she was going on a date and hurried out the door. Despite the end of her sentence, her mother set a curfew for her daughter. When the appointed time passed and the girl did not show up, Judith Jones called Luke Mitchell. He said that they had not met and he had not seen Jody that evening. This news was extremely confusing to the woman because her daughter had specifically asked permission to go on a date and seemed to have no other plans. When the mother said that the family was going to look, Mitchell immediately offered to help, grabbed the dog, and arrived at the Jones house. Around 10 p.m., the family, Luke Mitchell, and several volunteers scoured the neighborhood of East houses, including the very path Jody was supposed to take to the meeting. The Roman Road was bordered on one side by a high stone wall and on the other by a forest with cliffs. This place was ideal for secret meetings because it was protected from prying eyes. Once there, Luke Mitchell did not hesitate, headed for the gap in the wall at the end of the path opposite the East house, climbed over to the other side, and not surprised, told the others that Jody had been found and was dead. The clock read only 10:30 p.m. The members of the search team were frozen in shock, and the Jones family was plunged into extreme sadness. Even in such a terrible state, they did not immediately notice how quickly and confidently Luke Mitchell found the girl's body. It seemed as if he had hidden it there himself. Although the young man claimed that the dog had led him to the gap, according to experts, the wounds found on Jody Jones's body indicated personal motives for the crime. The brutality and multiplicity of the injuries indicated the attacker's extreme rage, a real outburst of anger. Perhaps a quarrel broke out between the young men, which escalated into a fight. The autopsy revealed numerous stab wounds, blue stains, and signs of strangulation. It is assumed that during the fight, the offender hit Jody several times in the face and then began to strangle her. Losing her balance, the girl fell to her knees. Then the killer grabbed her hair and cut her carotid artery with a knife, which caused her death. But he did not stop there. After stripping the victim and tying her body up, he inflicted numerous stab wounds. In the 10 days following the murder, police interrogated about 1,500 people and searched about 250 homes and businesses. Not a single building in East House and New Battle was left uninspected. And even with such extensive measures, no one raised more questions and suspicions for investigators than 14-year-old Luke Mitchell. Shortly before the tragedy, the police received information about a possible motive for the crime. Another girl admitted that she thought she was Luke's girlfriend and was not aware of Jody's existence until she heard about their relationship on the news. This was also indicated by a discovery near the crime scene. The initials of the lovers were carved into a tree. 2 months after the investigation began, Luke Mitchell was suspended from school after he refused to be isolated from other students. He was interrogated as a witness, but the young man stuck to his version of events. As an alibi, he claimed that he was cooking dinner at home, which was confirmed by his mother and older brother. Some witnesses claimed that Corinne's relationship with her son was unhealthy. The boy often slept in her bedroom. She also did not react in any way to Luke's addiction to marijuana, and generally indulged all his harmful whims. For example, at the age of 14, he became actively involved in Satanism, constantly watched horror movies, had a collection of pornographic magazines, was interested in stories about gruesome murders, and listened to heavy metal and rock. On his school textbooks were found the inscriptions, "Long live Satan, the ruler of hell," and "I offer my body, blood, and soul to the dark ruler of hell." The investigation revealed that the knife Luke always carried with him suddenly disappeared immediately after the murder. Only the scabbard was found in the house, engraved with Jody Jones's initials, the dates of her birth and death, 1989 to 2003, and a quote from the lead singer of her favorite band, Nirvana, The worst day of my life was when tomorrow never came. In addition, Luke's long raincoat, which he was seen wearing shortly before the murder and on the day of the tragedy, mysteriously disappeared. A neighbor of the Mitchell family said that on the evening of June 30th, Corinne was burning something in the backyard of the house. When questioned, the woman said it was dry grass. For a long time, she denied the very existence of such a raincoat in her son's wardrobe. And then she bought Luke a new one, exactly the same, continuing to insist that the previous one had never existed. Luke himself could not clearly explain the disappearance of these items, and 5 months later, for Christmas, he received a new knife from his mother. Additional suspicions were raised when Jody's body was found. None of those present that evening on the Roman road could recall any strange reactions from Luke's dog or its barking. On the contrary, it seemed that the young man knew exactly where the body was hidden and deliberately went in that direction. Moreover, even in the evening at 10:30 p.m., especially in the woods, it is completely dark, and Luke, when he saw the body, did not doubt for a moment that it was Jody, not to mention the horrific injuries that made identification difficult. During the first interrogation, the guy said that he recognized her by her red hair. So in 2004, Luke Mitchell was formally charged with the murder of his 14-year-old girlfriend, Jody Jones. At the preliminary stage and to this day, he does not admit his guilt and continues to insist that he was at home. The prosecution presented a number of strong pieces of evidence in court that somehow discredited Mitchell. Somehow, they discredited Mitchell's alibi and pointed to his involvement. For example, 2 witnesses claimed to have seen Luke and Jody together around 1650 on the day of the murder, and 50 minutes later, he appeared in a new fight alone. His phone records showed that at 1654, he called a talking clock service. When asked by the detective why Luca didn't just look at the wall clock at home if he was at the detective's question, why didn't Luca look at the wall clock at home if he was preparing dinner at that moment, the young man didn't know what to say. There was also no reasonable explanation for why Luke didn't look for Jody if she didn't show up for the agreed meeting. The guy just said that she probably didn't feel like it, and that evening the prosecution had a strong counter-argument. Jody was very much in love with Luke Mitchell and met with him several times a day whenever she had the opportunity. The girl lied to her family and ran away from home to see him. And that evening, when her mother had just lifted all the restrictions, she would hardly have gone to anyone else. The position and condition of the girl's body at the time of discovery indicated that she had gone to the other side of the wall on her own, which automatically proved that she trusted the person she was going to see. Luca's own brother became one of the key witnesses at the trial. It turned out that during the first interrogation, he had given false testimony, supporting his mother's version of events, that Luca was at home preparing dinner. However, later, when his computer was examined, it turned out that during the time period when the murder took place, Luca's brother was watching porn at home. When questioned about this, the young man changed his testimony, stating that if someone else had been in the house at the time, he would definitely not have watched adult films. During cross-examination, these words were used to confirm that neither Luca nor his mother were at home at the time. Later, Karina was even accused of perjury. In addition, the prosecutor's team tried to discredit her as a witness, referring to the case when Karina lied in a tattoo parlor that Luke was already 18 years old, so that he could get a tattoo in 6 months, could get a tattoo in half a month. This happened in October 2003, after the murder. The prosecution convinced the jury that this woman would do anything to please her son, and that her testimony could not be trusted. Other details surfaced during the trial. Luke Mitchell claimed that he had not been in contact with another girl for several months before Jody's murder. Luke Mitchell denied that he was involved in Jody's murder. However, phone records showed that they were in contact 79 times over a long period of time, including just 2 hours after Luke's last intimate contact with Jody, 2 days before the tragedy. Moreover, immediately after the murder, he was about to leave for a 2-week trip with his mistress. Another piece of evidence against Luke was his admission in court that he had smoked so much marijuana during the year that he sometimes smoked almost a pack a week. Jody's classmates said they saw them together during lunchtime on the day of the murder, and they were also smoking. The forensic psychologist noted that Luke Mitchell was short-tempered, aggressive, and could not to control himself. The only thing that surprised the audience was that his mother confirmed this. The diagnosis was confirmed by his mother. Usually in such cases, there is also a DNA test, but not in this case. Because the teenagers had met and had an intimate relationship, and Luca had touched a bloody body. An agreement was reached between the parties not to use DNA evidence in court, since it is impossible to explain its origin. Experts examined more than 120 items at the crime scene and did not find a single sample that would confirm or deny Mitchell's guilt. However, a used condom was found in front of the wall, and although the DNA found on it belonged to another man, there were no foreign marks on the girl's body, so this evidence was also excluded from the case. Despite all the arguments of the defense, the evidence presented was sufficient for the jury to convict to deliver a guilty verdict on January 21, 2005. In an attempt to get them to the site where Mitchell's body was found, Mitchell's lawyers tried to show that it was the dog that led him to the body, did not work. After a 5-hour deliberation, Luke was found guilty of murder and selling marijuana. When he heard the court's decision, he showed no emotion. He was later sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 20 years. Luke Mitchell began serving his sentence in a juvenile detention center in Poland and was later transferred to a prison in Greenock. Until 2021, he filed numerous appeals, but none of them were successful. The lawyers managed to attract media attention and win the sympathy of a part of society who believe he was convicted without sufficient evidence. They also violated his rights during his first interrogation since the age of 14, when the police spoke to him without a lawyer present. In 2019, a therapist named Sandra Lynn even organized a fundraiser in support of Luke Mitchell. Urging people to open their eyes to the lies and restore justice for Jody and Luke. Later, the family of the deceased girl publicly criticized her, saying that they had always were confident that the police had convicted the right person. Be that as it may, so far no attempts to mitigate the sentence have brought Luke Mitchell any closer to release. And in June 2023, he failed a standard drug test, which postponed his request for parole until at least 2026. In my opinion, as long as the family of the murdered child is alive, he is unlikely to get out of prison. What do you think? Did the prosecution present enough evidence and did it act fairly towards the 14-year-old? I would be happy to hear your thoughts in the comments. As usual, we thank you for watching and remind you that it would be great if you could support the video by liking and subscribing to the channel. It's always interesting and sometimes even scary. Everyone's life is full of dreams and aspirations. For some, it's becoming a parent or meeting family after a long time apart. For others, it is to make a long-awaited trip abroad. And for Victoria Seilers, her most cherished dream was to feel the wind on her face again while skydiving. Victoria has been working as a skydiving instructor for over 15 years. Her life, full of risk and adrenaline, brought her great pleasure. She received a huge charge of positive emotions from every jump in the sky. But recently, everything changed. Victoria became a happy mother. Due to pregnancy and childbirth, she had to give up her favorite pastime for a while. But in the spring of 2015, feeling an irresistible urge to plunge back into the coveted feeling of free flight, Victoria decided to make another parachute jump. After all, parachuting was not just her job, but her greatest passion in life, without which she felt incomplete. On a sunny April day, Victoria carefully prepared for her next jump. She scrupulously checked all her equipment, making sure that every detail was in perfect working order and that nothing would fail at high altitude. The woman was nervous, as this flight was to be her first after a long break due to the birth of her child. But at the same time, she was looking forward to the coveted feeling of free fall and exciting winged flight under an open dome. The airplane steadily rose into the high, cloudless sky. Victoria took one last look at her survival kit, making sure everything was in place, and pushed off the side of the plane with determination. At first, her trained body had to withstand the powerful gusts of wind during the weightless free fall in the open void. But a moment later, after a sharp jerk of the red ring, The main parachute was supposed to safely slow her descent. However, fate proved cruel. The dome did not open at all. Realizing the criticality of the situation, Victoria tried to immediately deploy the backup parachute, but for some reason, it also failed. In those crucial seconds, the woman begged for rescue in desperation and continued to pull the handle of the reserve parachute in terror. Perhaps there had been a breakdown somewhere, and the mechanism was jammed for some reason, but even so, she was doomed to die without an urgent release. Victoria prayed fervently that in a few moments everything would be resolved by a miracle, but it did not happen. Absolutely defenseless, with no chance of being rescued, she fell to the ground from an impressive height of over 1,200 meters. Colleagues and experienced instructors who closely accompanied and watched Victoria's jump could not understand what was happening at first. They saw with their own eyes how her parachutes failed over and over again and did not open in the thin air. Not understanding the reasons for this strange situation, the instructors immediately called an ambulance to the scene. Everyone present was convinced that there was virtually no chance of survival after such a fall from a great height, so the rescuers' goal would be to recover Victoria's body. However, upon arrival at the scene, the doctors found that the woman was still faint but had a weak pulse. Without wasting a moment, Victoria was immediately hospitalized. A thorough diagnostic examination using the latest medical equipment revealed a horrifying picture. The victim had suffered numerous injuries of varying severity: a fracture of the base of her skull, complex cracks in both pelvic bones, her spine was damaged in 4 places at once, and there was internal bleeding and damage to a number of vital organs. Victoria's condition was extremely critical, so to minimize the risks, doctors took urgent measures and put her in a deep artificial coma. From a medical point of view, further prognoses for recovery were disappointing. Even highly professional doctors could hardly assume whether Victoria would ever come out of her coma, let alone whether she would be able to move independently and walk again. Despite such pessimistic prospects, the experienced medical team unanimously decided to make every effort to save the woman's life. Shortly after the unfortunate incident, 2 men who were also professional skydivers at the club where Victoria worked became aware of the mysterious circumstances with her parachute equipment. After carefully checking it, one of them found several extremely strange and suspicious details. In Victoria's main parachute, the lines in the suspension system were somehow tangled in a very unusual, extremely intricate way, and an experienced expert immediately realized that under such circumstances, no one, even the most experienced skydiver, could have untangled them in the critically limited time available for freefall, and Victoria's backup parachute was missing several critical small parts, the very ones without which the system could not physically work and open the dome. All of these facts looked extremely suspicious and clearly indicated deliberate illegal interference with the parachute equipment. The instructor carefully examined Victoria's landing site, as well as her personal belongings and hand luggage, but could not find any trace of the missing parachute parts nearby. After being convinced that the situation had all the hallmarks of a deliberate offense, the man immediately filed a statement with law enforcement. According to official statistics from the British Parachute Association, over 2,300,000 parachute jumps were recorded and successfully completed in the UK between 2005 and 2014. And not once has there been a situation where both the main and reserve parachutes failed at the same time. Based on this statistical information, the police launched a thorough investigation into a possible premeditated murder attempt. Investigators urgently invited for questioning the same colleague of Victoria's who had initially reported his suspicions about the parachute incident. During the conversation, the man suggested that someone might have had some hidden hostile motives or jealousy towards the victim and sabotaged her equipment. However, a thorough investigation did not reveal any evidence of this version of conflict or enmity. Instead, it was possible to establish one very important and suspicious fact. On the day of the jump, a few minutes before takeoff, Victoria's husband Emil went to the restroom and could easily have tampered with his wife's parachute equipment unhindered and alone. Given the seriousness of the circumstances, Emil was immediately detained for questioning as a suspect. When the investigators asked him whether he was aware of the grounds for his detention, Emil remained silent for some time. When the investigator clarified that it was a possible attempt to murder his wife Victoria, the man suddenly pleaded guilty and began to calmly tell the story. What followed were numerous shocking details and cynical revelations that cast great doubt on Emil's commitment to his family and wife. In particular, he reported on his new amorous connection, a passionate relationship with Stephanie Gawler, a young and successful female athlete. Emil admitted that his marriage to Victoria had long become a boring, burdensome burden for him, and he dreamed of starting a completely new free life on the side with his passion. In addition, the man admitted that he needed a significant amount of money and expected to receive it from insurance payments in the event of his wife's death. While telling all of this, Emil looked cynical and heartless, completely unrepentant of his terrible deed. He tried to make it look like he had good reasons to do so for his own happiness. To dispel any doubts about Emil's guilt, the investigators conducted a special experiment. They asked a completely unprepared and incompetent person to do all the necessary manipulations to disable the parachute system. The person had only a few minutes to complete this task. This experiment convincingly proved that the same time, a few minutes, and Emil had more, was enough to ruin both of Victoria's parachutes. The evidence of the man's guilt was becoming more obvious. However, no matter what, Victoria refused to believe in Emil's involvement and admit his guilt. She began to give false information to the police, in particular, about her husband's allegedly very short absence from the bathroom. It was only as the investigation moved inexorably forward that Victoria finally began to realize the horrifying truth. Her beloved husband had actually tried to kill her and their children in order to start a free life with his passion and take possession of Victoria's insurance money. After a lengthy trial, Emil was sentenced to a mandatory 18-year prison term for the premeditated attempted murder of his wife. It was only after the verdict was announced that Victoria allegedly woke up from her blind self-delusion and finally realized the horrific truth. Her husband was a real psychopath who was willing to ruthlessly kill her and their little children for money and entertainment. The last night of June 2009 put an end to the long wanderings of the Shafee family. It seemed that they had finally found their long-awaited peace. However, it turned out to be a deceptive calm before the storm. The next day, the city of Kingston, located on the shores of Lake Ontario, was shaken by the news of a terrible tragedy in which several people were killed. This city was the first capital of United Canada in 1841 and still remains an important center where 9 federal prisons are located. In the summer of 2009, an event occurred that was initially mistaken for an accident. A submerged car with the bodies of 3 teenagers and 1 adult woman was found in the waters near the locks. However, the police quickly realized that it was a premeditated murder. The family patriarch, Mohammed Shafia, was born in the 1950s in Kabul to a middle-class family. Having not received a proper education, he dropped out of school after the 7th grade. Nevertheless, Mohammed worked hard and later became a successful entrepreneur, turning his electronic shop into a profitable import-export business. In 1979, Shafia married Rona, the daughter of a retired colonel. Rona kept a diary in which she described her horrible married life, full of abuse from her husband. Shafia constantly insulted and humiliated his wife, forbade her to see her mother, and criticized her economic skills. Later, Rona suggested that Shafia take a second wife, as polygamy was allowed in Afghanistan. In 1988, 17-year-old Tuoba became Shafia's second wife. Soon after, their daughter Zainab was born. Since then, Rona has been forced to become Tuoba's assistant, taking care of her and the baby. The Shafia family changed several countries of residence due to the military conflicts in Afghanistan. Finally, in 2007, having a considerable fortune, Mohammed took advantage of an investment program and moved the family to Canada. However, they had to hide their polygamous union, as it is illegal in Canada. Tuoba was declared as Shafia's official wife, and Rona was declared as a cousin, a housewife for a large family. Moving to cosmopolitan Montreal inspired Rona to make better changes in her life. However, the home was dominated by strict Afghan customs, and women in the family were subjected to constant oppression and control. Adapting to life in Montreal proved difficult for the Shafis. The children, who were used to English schools in Dubai, were enrolled in a French language school. Only Rona was fluent in French, but her knowledge was ignored, and she felt marginalized. Their parents hardly spoke English or French, so their children were the only translators for them. While their own home was being built, the family rented a modest 4-room house for 9 people. The furniture from Dubai was not carefully unpacked. In contrast to their luxurious past life, the children now slept on mattresses on the floor. Between 2007 and 2009, Mohammed spent only 6 months in Canada, mostly doing business in Dubai. Meanwhile, his eldest son Hamid looked after the family. Before moving to Canada, his father had made it a rule to earn an education in order to have fun with his friends. Hamid closely monitored his sisters Zainab and Sahar, who were fond of the Western way of life, and this caused major family conflicts. Despite her brother's authority, Zainab hid some aspects of her life from him. In February 2008, 18-year-old Zainab met Omar, a Pakistani man. Inspired by his first love, the young man began courting the girl, sending her Valentine's Day cards and asking her to meet him. Zainab accepted his friendship with Omar, warning him to be careful because of the extremely strict rules in the house. They could rarely see each other alone in the library, in secret from their brothers and father. Zainab was afraid of severe reprisals from her family if their relationship was discovered. One day, when the Shafis were in Dubai and Hamid was at school, Zainab invited Omar to her home. However, Hamid returned prematurely and found his guest in the garage. He forced the young man to leave, and Zainab was isolated in a room for 10 months without the right to leave or see Omar. The younger Sahar also suffered from cultural control. At school, she took off her hijab, let her hair down, and wore makeup like her American peers. Her mother, Tuoba, had to bring Sahar to school and pick her up right after class to control her free time. Boys and girls in the Shafi'i family were not allowed to communicate with anyone outside the family or visit friends. Sahar even tried to poison herself by drinking water with gel, but her rescue cries for help went unanswered. For a year, Rona tried to get a divorce from Shafia through a third-party human rights activist, but he threatened to retaliate if she tried to leave the family. Technology became the only area of life that Mohammed could not fully control. A year after the incident with Omar, 19-year-old Zainab was allowed to attend school again, albeit under the close supervision of her brother and mother. Zainab resumed secret meetings with Omar through emails. She also introduced 16-year-old Sahar to her classmate Ricardo, a Honduran national. The couple sometimes went on double dates. Giti, the 13-year-old younger sister, was beginning to show defiance against her father's strict rules, preferring fashionable clothes and makeup like her older sisters. Despite Mohammed's complaints, Giti continued her rebellious behavior. One April evening in 2009, Mohammed and Hamid severely beat Giti and 2 other children when they were late for school. Powerless, Zainab watched her family members being tortured. This incident pushed her to decide to escape from her domestic hell. On April 17, 2009, Zainab disappeared from home. Hamid reported his sister's disappearance to the police. The children told officers about the constant abuse and threats from their father and brother for any disobedience. However, Mohammed's presence and a few harsh words made the children recant their testimony. The social worker did not find sufficient grounds to investigate. Meanwhile, Zainab found refuge in a shelter for young women. It was there that she first experienced freedom. Omar was an intermediary between her and her family. The police came to make sure that Zainab left the house voluntarily. The officer insisted to her parents that they respect her decision to separate. Tuoba persuaded Omar to arrange a meeting with Zainab, where she would persuade her daughter to return, promising her permission to marry Omar. Lured by this tempting avenue, Zainab returned home on May 1st. Zainab and Omar's wedding ceremony was scheduled for May 18th. However, the Shafi'i family was against this union, and Tuoba tried her best to disrupt the marriage because of the groom's different cultural background. Sahar also dreamed of running away to Honduras with her beloved Ricardo and her younger sister Giti. The wedding did take place despite the ban, but the ceremony itself was cold and soulless, lacking the groom's relatives or basic decorations. The wedding dinner ended prematurely, as the newlyweds took an official divorce under pressure from Zainab's parents, for whom family honor was paramount. However, this did not quell Mohammed's anger at his daughter for flouting his will. Meanwhile, Sahar was also facing a terrible punishment for her secret relationship with Ricardo, which could soon be revealed. On June 1st, Hamid traveled to Dubai to meet with his father. On June 13th, they both arrived in Montreal. When they met, Mohammed kissed Zainab gently, as if to forgive her, although his sincerity was questionable. He wanted to restore the illusion of harmony in the family. On June 23rd, at around 15 o'clock, the Shafiq family went on a short trip. Hamid, Mohammed, and the younger children drove a Lexus, and the women drove a newly purchased used Nissan. After a long time of troubles, they were finally enveloped in a sense of peace. The route turned out to be a strange one, as it took them directly to Grand Remy along the Gatineau River. As the family explored the local sites, they took pictures with their cell phones, capturing transient moments of joy. The women laughed and had fun in the hotel, while the men strolled outside. Despite the momentary lull, the men were likely harboring sinister designs. After spending the night in a motel, the family moved further south to Niagara the next day, forming a 300-mile horseshoe-shaped route. Chapter 10. On the evening of June 25th, the Shafis reached Niagara Falls and stayed in a hotel for 4 days. They visited local attractions, enjoyed fast food and shopping at the mall. However, on the night of June 27th, Hamid unexpectedly made a 5-hour drive to Kingston and back, according to his phone signals. On June 29th, at 6:45 p.m., the time of checkout was also strange. Too late for the 7-hour drive to Montreal. Security cameras recorded Hamid paying cash for the rooms. It was only at 8 p.m. that the two cars left, with Mohammed and Hamid in the Lexus and Tuoba, the only woman with a license, driving the Nissan. Heading east to Toronto, Sahar managed to take a photo of the bright city lights and share it with Ricardo. After driving around the city, the cars turned onto Highway 401 toward Kingston. Around 10:30 p.m., they stopped for a meal at McDonald's. The women and children were tired, so Mohammed took over for Tuoba at the wheel. As they approached Kingston, only Hamid and Mohammed were awake. Ignoring the entrances to the city, they took the northern bypass toward the Kingston Mills Gateway and arrived at 1:30 a.m. At 1:36 a.m., Sahar received the last message from Ricardo. Mohammed dropped the others off at the Nissan, and Tuoba took the driver's seat, waiting for her husband and son to find a place to stay. The place to wait was strange. They passed numerous hotels on the way. Around 2 a.m., the Kingston East Motel received an unexpected call requesting accommodation. Two men, Mohammed and Hamid, appeared at the door. When asked about the number of guests, they first answered 6, then began to stagger and talk in an incomprehensible language. Eventually, they agreed on 6 people. Hamid paid in cash and took the 3 sleepy children to their room, after which he and his father drove away to the gateways in an SUV, which seemed strange to the administrator. Deciding to watch some more, he discovered that at 2:30 a.m. the guests had not returned, which only heightened his suspicions. Meanwhile, the black Nissan with 4 women, Mohammed's first wife Rona, 3 daughters Zainab, Sahar, and Gitti, was slowly sinking into the water. This was the plan of the male part of the Shafi'i family to restore their honor. Trying to stage a car accident, the criminals faced a number of obstacles. First, they had to overcome a high curb, drive on the grass, turn sharply left to avoid the rocks, and then right again. Even then, a concrete parapet prevented us from reaching the water. With the engine running and the dive plan thwarted, the family began to push the Nissan into the water with the help of an SUV. As a result of the powerful impact, the Lexus's left headlight shattered and the fragments scattered on the ground. After picking up all the shattered elements of the headlight in the darkness, the criminals calmly returned to the motel. The next morning, the Kingston police had to unravel this horrific crime, to identify the victims and find out the circumstances of the incident. Despite the shallow water, only 6 feet, none of the victims even attempted to escape or save themselves. Their seats were reclined, and their seat belts were undone. The only clues were the headlight fragments found on the ground. While the Kingston police were investigating the mysterious incident, the Shafia family in Montreal received a desperate call from the Shafia family reporting the disappearance of their 3 daughters. According to Tuoba's version, the girls had allegedly stolen a car while their parents were checking into a motel. At 7:30 a.m., Hamid also called 911, claiming that their car had crashed into a yellow barrier in an empty parking lot. The police immediately noticed the match between the Lexus's broken headlight and the height of the barrier. Soon, the tragedy of the family's trip was all over the news. The public sympathized with the grieving parents and their nanny, who had allegedly lost 3 daughters. However, pity quickly gave way to suspicion when the tapped recordings from Shafiq's cars revealed the horrifying truth. In fact, Mohammed was furious because of the disobedience of his daughters, Zainab and Sahar, who had started a relationship against his will. For him, nothing was more valuable than family honor, so these girls had to atone for their dishonor with the ultimate punishment of death. Giti, who imitated her older sisters, and Rona, whose behavior also became suspicious to Shafia, died with them. The police solved the case in 3 weeks, having numerous clues: appeals to law enforcement, complaints to the Child Protection Service, Zainab's previous attempt to run away from home, her father's brutality, and finally the disclosure of Rona's identity. Witnesses saw 2 cars near the locks that night. All the victims had head injuries on their bodies, meaning that they had been beaten in advance before being put into the water, which explained the lack of rescue attempts. On July 21st, the Shafi family home was searched and the 3 youngest children were taken away for their safety. Forensic evidence against the rest of the family was found in the house. On Hamid's laptop, they found a history of searches for maps of eastern Ontario, remote lakes and reservoirs, as well as strange queries such as, "Can I manage my property from prison?" His suitcase also contained photos of the sisters with their boyfriends, probably to expose the secret relationship to Zainab and Sahar's father later. Subsequently, Tuoba, Hamid, and Mohammed Shafiq were arrested and charged with the premeditated murder of 4 people. After 15 hours of deliberations, the jury handed down life sentences to all 3 criminals. However, the tragedy could have been prevented. Numerous teachers, relatives, and law enforcement officials were aware of the horrific conditions in the Shafi household, but no one took appropriate action. Mohammed Shafia's distorted concept of honor, which considered women to be property, consumed the lives of his own children. This is the end of this story. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Goodbye. In October 2022, a group of 7 young Americans went on vacation to the Mexican resort town of Cabo. Among them was 25-year-old Shankwella Robinson, an entrepreneurial girl from Charlotte, North Carolina. With a degree in business, she started her own clothing brand, Ivy Trick, and a hair salon in her hometown. Shankwella specialized in helping children with alopecia, a severe condition that leads to hair loss and baldness. Using wigs and hairstyles, she helped children camouflage the disease and boost their self-confidence. In addition to her business, Shankwella actively developed her social media pages, where she popularized her own brand and attracted new customers. At the age of 25, she has already managed to achieve financial freedom and a stable income. No wonder she was surrounded by many friends and acquaintances. For a vacation in Mexico, the company of modest budgets banded together and rented a luxurious 6-bedroom villa with a jacuzzi, swimming pool, and private beach access. The monthly rent for such a place was $45,000. Among Shankwella's friends was her closest friend, Colo Cook, with whom she had been friends for many years. He often visited the Robinsons' home and knew all the members of the girls' family well. The first days of the vacation went great. The young people had fun by the pool, had fun, drank, and constantly posted stories and photos on their Instagram accounts. However, on October 25th, a strange video appeared on Shankwella's page, which alarmed her followers and family. The footage showed Shankwella Robinson lying unconscious on the floor after drinking too much alcohol. Next to her stood the girl's best friend Khalil Cook, who was filming everything on her phone and commenting mockingly on the situation. For the usual content of the cheerful Shankwella who worked with children, such materials were completely atypical. When the morning of October 26th came, Khalil called Shankwella's mother, Salomon Robinson, and told her the terrible news. Her daughter had died of an alcohol overdose. The man assured her that he and his friends had done everything possible to save the girl, even calling a doctor to the villa, but to no avail. Over the next few days, Shankwelly's friends began to take turns visiting the Robinsons' family, ostensibly to support them in their time of need. However, all of their stories about the last hours of the girl's life differed greatly from each other in small details. Some said they saw Shankwella unconscious in the bathroom, while others claimed it happened in bed or the toilet. None of the young men admitted who was the first to find the girl in critical condition. After several such contradictory stories, Salomon had a feeling that the case was not clean and that the six were hiding something. The woman and her husband decided to go to the police to open a case to investigate their daughter's death. A few weeks later, the results of Shankwalla's autopsy came out, which completely negated the version of alcohol poisoning. Experts found that the cause of death of the 25-year-old girl was a severe spinal cord injury due to displacement and fracture of the cervical vertebrae. Moreover, the test did not reveal any alcohol residues in Shankwella's body. These findings came as a bolt from the blue for Salomon Robinson. She finally realized that Shankwella's friends were actually deceiving her and hiding the truth about the true circumstances of her daughter's death. The young men's visits to the Robinsons' home immediately stopped, and they stopped answering their phone calls. For the mother, this was another confirmation of their distrust. The woman immediately turned to the media and bloggers, demanding wide publicity for the tragedy and a thorough police investigation. This finally began to yield the first results. Subsequently, a series of shocking videos were posted on the internet, completely debunking the legend of accidental alcohol poisoning. The footage showed Shankwella Robinson fighting in a fierce brawl with another girl from their company, Nelsie Hawkins. The blows came one after the other, and the other young people not only did not interfere, but watched the incident from the same room. Moreover, it was Colonel Cook, allegedly Shankwella's closest friend, who not only did not try to break up the fight, but openly encouraged Shankwella and filmed everything on her phone. At one point, the girl was already lying on the floor in critical condition, and Khalil, laughing, turned to her. "Shankwella, can you hit back for once? Come on." After Shankwella lost consciousness from numerous injuries, her health condition rapidly deteriorated. The girl began to have severe convulsions, and her heart stopped several times. The friends called a doctor to the villa, but refused her recommendation to hospitalize Shankwella immediately. At first, the young people lied, saying that medical care in the hospital cost a huge sum of $5,000, which they did not have. In fact, the cost was much lower, but they insisted on treating the victim at the villa. The doctor was forced to provide resuscitation on the spot. Despite all the efforts, at about 3 p.m. on the same day, the 25-year-old's heart stopped completely. The cause of death was massive internal bleeding and spinal cord damage due to a fractured cervical vertebrae. According to doctors, if Shankwella had been hospitalized immediately, her life could have been saved. It was the testimony of the doctor who was called that became the key evidence of the blatant negligence or even malicious intent of Shankwella's friends who refused to provide urgent qualified medical care for the victim. After the shocking videos of the fight and the grave medical details were made public, the case of Shankwella Robinson gained wide publicity. The Mexican law enforcement agencies in whose territory the incident occurred classified the case as feminicide, the murder of a woman because of her gender. Such crimes are investigated especially thoroughly and punished as severely as possible. However, the question of jurisdiction immediately arose. Where exactly should the trial of this extremely high-profile case take place? The crime was committed in Mexico, but all the defendants are U.S. citizens. Salomon Robinson and her husband demand that the trial must take place in the United States, and that the most severe punishment be imposed not only on the person who directly struck Shankwella. In their opinion, all 6 young men who were present at the villa are equally guilty of the girl's death. After all, they watched the incident and not only did not try to help or stop the fight, but also actively provoked the conflict through their actions and inaction. The most cynical behavior in this situation seems to be that of Colonel Cook, who was filming the beating on his phone and directly encouraging Shankwella to hit back. The investigation had even more questions about the medical worker who was called to the villa by the friends to help Shankwella after the fight. In his notes, the girl's condition was satisfactory, allegedly only alcohol intoxication without any injuries. However, the numerous bruises, abrasions, and hemorrhages on Shankwella's face and body stood in stark contrast to these findings. Subsequently, there were suggestions that the doctor could have been bribed by his friends to downplay the severity of Shangvelia's injuries and to deflect suspicions of violence. It is possible that the doctor did not see the victim at all, but only issued fictitious documents for a bribe. The investigation into this complex and intricate case is ongoing. First, it must be completed by the Mexican side on its territory, and then all materials will be transferred to investigators in the United States to continue according to the evidence collected. The parents of the deceased, Shankwella Robinson, do not intend to leave the case to chance. They insist on the most transparent, complete, and objective investigation with the participation of international experts. Their main goal is to ensure that all those involved in their daughter's death are brought to justice and punished, regardless of their degree of direct culpability. This tragic story has resonated loudly in the media and has become a reminder of the fragility of true friendship and the need to treat people in our environment with more care. The case of Shankwella Robinson showed that even seemingly close friends can turn out to be traitors and enemies. The story of a young, successful, and cheerful girl whose fun at the resort suddenly turned into a nightmare has become a symbol of the cruelty that can be hidden under the mask of the most sincere smile and warm company. This is a stern warning against blind trust in strangers and excessive consumption of alcohol, which dulls the mind. A fair and inevitable punishment for all those involved in this brutal crime will embody the principle that betrayal of friends, cynicism, and bullying cannot go unpunished in a civilized society. The memory of Shankwella Robinson should forever remind us of the price we sometimes have to pay for a false perception of human relationships. The story of Shankwella also showed how unreliable the testimony of some medical professionals can be, who for one reason or another cooperate with criminals and falsify documents. This is a separate important aspect that deserves to be thoroughly checked during the investigation. According to Shankwella's closest relatives, she was always a very kind and sincere person who tried to help others. This character trait was a driving force in both her business and personal life. She never refused to support anyone, and her home was always open to friends and family. Unfortunately, it was Shankwella's sincere and open heart that became the key to her tragedy. She perceived her social circle as her family, trusting them immensely. She could never have imagined that there were those among them who were capable of such insidious cruelty and abuse. Shankwella's story is a bitter reminder that the main lesson to be learned from it is to be careful about how we treat other people, even if they pretended to be friends for many years and seemed close and sincere. In fact, a person can completely change in an extreme situation and show their true colors. Only an inevitable and maximally fair punishment for Shankwella's killers can partially heal the wounds of her family and friends. It will also serve as a deterrent to those who may find themselves in a similar risky situation in the future. In the aftermath of the tragedy, Shankwella Robinson's family and friends continue to push hard for full disclosure of the circumstances of her death and fair punishment for all involved. For Salomon's mother and her husband, this has become a matter of life and a matter of principle. They will not rest until the truth is established and everyone is held accountable under the law. One of the main questions remains the role of the doctor who was called to the villa by Shankwella's friends after the beating. According to his notes, the girl had only mild signs of intoxication, nothing more. However, the fatal injuries to her head and body suggest the exact opposite. The family insists on a thorough check of this episode and finding out whether the medical worker was bribed to conceal the traces of the crime. The question of jurisdiction also remains open, where exactly the trial of the high-profile case will take place. The Mexican authorities, on whose territory the tragedy occurred, are inclined to impose the harshest possible sentence for femicide. At the same time, the Robinsons are seeking to transfer the case to an American court, relying on its greater independence and impartiality. Regardless of the venue, the Shankwella family is demanding the maximum punishment for all 6 young people who were present at the villa on those tragic October days in 2022. Even those who did not strike the girl directly, but only observed or provoked the conflict, are equally guilty of her death for Shankwella's family. Shankwella Robinson's story has become a symbol and a reminder for many around the world. Her case has vividly illustrated what can actually lie behind the smiles and hugs of even the closest people. How treacherous cruelty and attempts to protect oneself can outweigh the simplest human values and basic respect for life. At the same time, this tragedy has revealed another problem: how unreliable and fake official medical documents and conclusions often are. Doctors who are bribed by criminals or deliberately commit fraud call into question the entire healthcare system and destroy public trust. It is stories like these that prompt us to launch serious reforms and strengthen control over compliance with ethical standards in the medical field. Otherwise, innocent victims of crimes like Shankwilla's risk being left without fair justice. However, the main message of this story is to be more careful and cautious about the people around us. You shouldn't open up completely and trust even your closest environment if you don't have 100% guarantees of their sincerity and decency. After all, the mask of benevolence can hide something much more sinister and destructive. A fair trial, an inevitable punishment for Shankwelli's killers, can partially heal the wounds and tame the enemies who used to pose as friends. This is an important step to restore trust and harmony in society. However, the main lesson of the Shankwelli tragedy is to maintain restraint and vigilance in our attitude towards others. A friend today can become an enemy tomorrow. While the investigation is ongoing and all the details of Shankwelli Robinson's death are being clarified, her parents Salomon and Cedric continue to fight tirelessly for justice. They created a non-governmental organization called Justice for Shankwella to unite the efforts of all those who care and draw maximum attention to this high-profile case. The organization's activists regularly organize peaceful protests and rallies near court and law enforcement buildings. In this way, they try to prevent the authorities from forgetting or downplaying the terrible tragedy that befell their family. After all, it is often publicity and pressure that play a decisive role in punishing even the most daring criminals. In addition, Justice for Shankwelli is raising money for legal support of the trial, engaging the most qualified lawyers and experts. The relatives of the deceased are convinced that without first-class legal assistance, their chances of winning will be minimal. By the way, it later turned out that a similar situation with a fatal beating had already happened in the past to 6 of Shankwella's friends. On 2 different occasions in 2018 and 2019, young people also gathered in a large group, where someone was seriously injured after the clashes, but the incident was officially washed away, allegedly due to a lack of direct evidence. These facts became another strong argument for the court regarding the criminal behavior of the suspects. Despite all the details and obvious evidence to date that directly points to a brutal murder, the defense of the 6 defendants continues to insist on the accident version. They say that the girls simply quarreled over a trifle after drinking, and Shankwella had a very unfortunate fall and inflicted a fatal injury on herself. Everything else is just the inflammation of passions by others. However, the behavior of the young men themselves after the incident contrasts sharply with their self-justification. They immediately left Mexico without waiting for the results of the autopsy, without returning the money for the unused villa rental. And most importantly, they avoided direct contact with the victims' relatives and shamelessly lied about the last hours of Shankwella. The absolute unanimity, first in the false version of alcohol poisoning, and later in the insistence on accidental injury, also raises questions. It looks too much like a pre-planned, cynical plan. In addition, there is direct video evidence of the use of force against Shankwelli by her friend Nelsie Hawkins, and even the girl's closest friend, Callel Cook, not only did not try to stop the fight, but actually provoked it with his calls. So on the eve of the trial, the investigation took new twists and turns with the disclosure of previously unknown details. According to the investigators, a few hours before the fatal fight, a merry group of friends had been having fun in a rather specific way. It turned out that while vacationing at the villa, one of the old friends, whom the company had invited somewhere, agreed to bring a certain amount of ecstasy, a popular psychoactive drug. The young people consumed these pills, supplementing them with alcohol, after which they experienced characteristic euphoria, increased excitability and energy. It is likely that the change in mental state from the combination of psychotropic substances caused the conflict with Shankwella initiated by Nelsie. In fact, all 6 young men were quite drunk at the time, which could have caused an outbreak of aggression for any insignificant reason. According to toxicologists, Shankwella was also under the influence of a certain dose of ecstasy and alcohol, which could have significantly weakened her reaction and coordination during the fight. However, no mental state is an excuse for causing physical harm to another person, let alone a fatal one. So the story of an allegedly completely accidental and unintentional incident actually falls apart. It is enough to put all the evidence together to make it finally clear that the young people used psychotropic substances, provoked a fight during which they brutally beat the girl to death, and then deliberately covered up the traces of the crime and spread false information.
Right. Okay. Having left prison property, time now is 10:15. On my watch. Mr. Stewart, I'm arresting you on suspicion of the murder of your late wife, Diane
You're joking.
Stewart, on Friday.
You're digging
Friday the 25th of June.
Well,
Say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned something which you later on in court.
Well,
You do say
what
may be
rubbish.
given evidence.
have you got nothing better to do than make
We
things
can
up?
discuss this at Thorpewood Police Station, which is where we're
Oh, my
going
God.
to.
The issue of organ donation, in the event of sudden death, always evokes a mixed reaction. For some, it is a noble act that gives life to others, while for others it is a difficult decision burdened by prejudice and fear. Recently, there was a case in Ukraine when a little boy saved 3 lives after his death by becoming a donor. Many thanks to his parents for such a difficult but worthy decision. Not everyone is capable of taking such a step, because there are still prejudices, fears, and distrust in society related to this issue. On the other hand, it is very difficult to watch a loved one's life end because of the lack of a suitable donor organ. Probably, everyone has to decide for themselves this delicate question in case of unforeseen circumstances. Are you ready to become a donor? Consider the story where a woman's decision to donate her organs for research after her death unexpectedly helped solve her own murder. Ian was born into a family where his parents respected him from childhood and listened to his opinions. He grew up to be a very independent young man. Everyone who knew Ian noted that he was surprisingly intelligent and mature for his age. Ian always knew exactly what he wanted, and he used to keep a notebook where he wrote down his plans for the coming days, months, and even years. He marked each item as completed and only then moved on. Ian's only drawback was always his stubbornness. He was unwavering in his decisions. While other people often did not like this, his parents considered this character trait to be positive. In their opinion, stubbornness was a manifestation of the perseverance necessary to achieve goals. After graduating from high school with honors, Ian entered university. In his 4th year, he met a girl who changed his life. The story of their meeting was quite unusual. At the time, Ian was driving a car given to him by his parents. One day, he noticed that the car was missing a part. Ian decided to quietly take this part from another car. When he was almost done, the owner of the car, Diana, a student at the same university, noticed the theft and ran outside. She was 2 years younger than Ian. The guy managed to make a joke and even asked for Diana's phone number. The next day, they had their first date, after which they started dating. Their union became strong, and all their friends saw them as inseparable. After graduating from university, Ian got a job in his hometown so that Diana could also get her degree. Later, they got married and moved to Cambridge. The story took place in the UK. 3 years after the wedding, they had 3 sons, Jamie and Oliver. The family was in perfect harmony. With the advent of children, their love and marriage became even stronger. Ian and Diane had good jobs, a decent income, and respect in the community. Over time, they were able to afford their own luxurious home. However, their happy life did not last long. On June 21, 2010, Ian returned home from the store where his wife had asked him to go. Diana was cooking for the family at the time, and the children had not yet returned home. When Ian opened the gate, he saw a terrible scene.
Okay, tell me exactly what's happened.
My wife's had a fit. I think she's in the garden. She's in the
Okay,
garden.
right, you need to slow down, okay, because
She's in the garden. She's unconscious.
Okay. Are you with the patient now?
I'm just indoors at the moment. I'm just
Can
going
you
out.
see her from where you are?
Yeah, yeah.
How old is she, please?
She's 45, 47, 47.
Is she awake?
No, she's not awake.
Is she
She's flushing
breathing?
enough.
Is
She's
she breathing?
No, I don't think so, no.
Right, you need to go and check on her, sir, for me, please.
I'm right beside her now.
Right, is she breathing?
No, sir, no.
She's not breathing.
Don't think so.
Right, well, check her for me.
Yeah.
Is she breathing?
I don't think so. I've turned her to try and put her in recovery position, but I can't do it. She's just flopped back. I think she's had a fit.
You think she's had a fit?
Well, I think so. She does have epilepsy.
His wife was lying on the asphalt outside the house, her body shaking with convulsions. Ian immediately called an ambulance, begging the paramedics to come as soon as possible. Unfortunately, the doctors were unable to save the woman, and she was pronounced dead from an epileptic seizure. The children, Jamie, 18, and Oliver, 15, were left half orphans, and Ian became a widower. It was a terrible situation to find your loved one unconscious and not be able to help. Ian suffered greatly after the death of his wife, with whom he had lived for many years. His friends advised him to see a psychiatrist because it seemed that he was starting to get depressed because of the loss of his wife, who was only 47 years old at the time of her death. However, Ian decided to deal with the pain on his own. A few months later, he joined the blog of writer Helen Bailey, dedicated to people who had lost loved ones and were struggling with feelings of loneliness. There, everyone could share their thoughts, experiences, and get support from other people who were going through similar suffering. Writer Helen Bailey was born on August 22, 1964 in Portland, England. Since childhood, she was fascinated by literature and dreamed of a writing career. As Helen herself recalled, as a teenager, she spent her free time writing stories in her diary, observing the behavior of others and analyzing the hidden motives of their actions. Helen was a sociable girl, the life of the party. She was able to entertain her friends with jokes, had the ability to encourage and give good advice. In addition, Bailey adored detective stories and true crime. After graduating with a degree in criminology, she worked for a while in the field of forensic research. However, her creative nature eventually took over. Helen changed her life dramatically, moving to another city and taking a job at a television company. At the same time, she began writing her first books for children and teenagers. In 1996, she began a romantic relationship with the owner of the company where she worked, John Sinfield. After 7 years of dating, the lovers got married and moved to another city. Helen and John's life seemed like an idyll. The lovers admired each other. Their relationship seemed strong and happy. However, tragedy struck the couple. Helen lost the child she had been waiting for and learned about infertility after a series of age-old and painful examinations. During this difficult period, her husband supported her. Later, they got a dachshund puppy named Boris, who became like a child to Bailey. Helen took great care of her little friend, sparing no expense. Despite her material wealth, good job, and happy family life, Helen faced new challenges. After their 15th wedding anniversary, while on vacation in Barbados in 2011, her husband John drowned in front of his wife. The woman experienced a real shock. Organizing the transportation of the body, cremation, and other formalities in a foreign country proved to be a difficult challenge. She wanted so much to just stay with her pain, but she had to go through all the necessary procedures. After the tragedy, Helen delved into writing her first book for adults, When Bad Things Happen in Good Places. The work was inspired by the circumstances of her husband's death. In a moment of carefree happiness, fate cruelly separated them. Just as Helen was standing happy in her new beautiful swimsuit, preparing to go swimming, her lover was killed by a sudden wave that covered him head-on. By the time of that vacation, Bailey had carefully prepared for it, losing a few pounds and spending a long time choosing the perfect bikini. Then, when she finally felt joyful and confident, misfortune struck. The book, published in 2015, described this abrupt change in emotional states, from the peak of happiness to the boundless grief that swept over Helen in a strong wave. By that time, Bailey already had a popular blog about experiencing the loss of loved ones. This resource has become a circle of support for many lonely readers who have also experienced grief. One of Helen's fans was Ian Stewart, who had also recently been widowed after the death of his wife Diana. Ian empathized so much with the words of the stranger from the blog that he decided to contact her. This is how their correspondence began and soon grew into a romantic relationship. Unlike their previous relationships, this couple acted swiftly. They soon started living together and began discussing a wedding. They both sold their homes and used the proceeds to buy a luxurious home with 6 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, a swimming pool, a guest house, and a large plot of land. Ian and Helen's family were a bit wary of the rapid development and the age difference. However, in general, everyone was happy to see their family happy again. The only thing that worried Bailey's family was Ian's illness. He suffered from constant painful attacks due to an old spinal injury. Bailey did everything she could to support her new husband. She even changed her will, making Ian the sole heir to her property. The woman left part of her fortune for her beloved dog Boris. Helen cherished her little friend very much, sparing no expense for his entertainment and benefits. Shortly after the wedding, Helen's health deteriorated significantly. She felt constantly weak, lethargic, and lost weight and appetite. Visits to doctors were fruitless. Most doctors were inclined to believe that she was simply overworked and advised her to get more rest. However, Helen's condition only worsened, and her tests were normal. In addition to her physical ailments, Bailey had problems with her short-term memory. She forgot to pay in restaurants and shops and could suddenly step out into the roadway, risking being hit by a car. Once, Helen even lost Boris in the playground and came home without him. Ian tried to help his wife by taking over the household chores. However, Helen's condition only worsened. In search of the causes of her malaise, she spent hours searching for information on the internet, asking questions such as, "Why am I always tired? Why do I faint from fatigue even though I get enough sleep?" In the end, Bailey decided to isolate herself with Boris to focus on her new novel. She did not inform any of her family about these plans and simply stopped contacting them. When Helen didn't respond for a long time, her brother sounded the alarm. After several days of futile attempts, he forced Ian to file a police report on his wife's disappearance. The police took the disappearance report seriously. They were alarmed by the fact that Helen had not turned on her phone once since she left. These days, it's hard to imagine a person existing without a cell phone. In addition, there were no transactions from the woman's bank accounts, and her car remained at home, increasing the anxiety of law enforcement. It is possible that Bailey was kidnapped or committed suicide due to depression, although the woman's brother assured that they were very close, and a month before her disappearance, Helen had no suicidal tendencies and was actively planning for the future. The brother also did not support the other version, that the writer decided to start a new life. The search was thorough, but there was no trace of Helen. Subsequently, the investigation switched to the possibility of murder because nothing in Ian's behavior indicated his wife's intention to harm herself. Moreover, her notebook contained plans for the future. Eventually, the police turned their attention to the testimony of Bailey's neighbor. Despite the significant age difference, they got along well. The neighbor advised investigators to pay more attention to Ian and his behavior after his wife's disappearance. After all, he did not seem to be grieving, and on the contrary, he seemed quite calm. The investigation revealed a number of suspicious details in Ian's behavior. First, the cell phone data did not match his testimony. Helen's phone remained at home for several days after her departure. Secondly, a few days before his wife's disappearance, Ian withdrew a significant amount of money from her account and transferred it to himself. In addition, he increased the maximum amount for cash withdrawals from $10,000 to $40,000. Soon after, Ian was detained and charged with the writer's murder. Of course, he denied everything. 3 months had passed since Helen went missing, and there was still no sign of her. Investigators decided to talk again to the neighbor from whom they had previously received a valuable tip. And this time, her advice proved to be extremely important. The layout of the neighbor's house was similar to Helen and Ian's. Although the investigators had already thoroughly examined the property, the neighbor reported the presence of a hidden basement in the garage. It was a kind of recessed area under the floor for car repairs. The neighbor's worst suspicions turned out to be true. In the hole, investigators found the bodies of Helen Bailey and her beloved dog, Boris. Ian did his best to hide the hiding place. He painted the floor in such a way that the transition from the main room to the hole was almost invisible. Just looking under the car, without knowing about the presence of this recess, it was impossible to suspect anything suspicious. When investigators reported the gruesome discovery to Helen's brother, he said that during the first visit to the newly formed family's home, the writer jokingly showed him the place, saying it was the perfect hiding place for a body of the right size. Who would have thought then that Ian would take the joke literally and use it as advice? Later, it turned out that Ian had tried to sell the house twice during those 3 months. The first time was immediately after his wife's disappearance, but he was denied because he did not have the signature of Helen, who was also a co-owner of the house. The motive for the murder, as it turned out, was money. Ian, 59, wanted to take possession of his wife's considerable wealth. The trial lasted 2 years. Many new details of this horrific story were revealed at the hearings. During the examination of Helen's body, experts found a high concentration of a sleeping pill in her body. The same one that Ian allegedly prescribed for himself to treat insomnia was actually used to poison his wife within weeks of the wedding. That's why Bailey began to feel constantly drowsy and lethargic. The high dose of sleeping pills in her food and drink caused memory impairment and other symptoms. When the poison didn't work properly, Ian moved on to another plan. According to forensic experts, the cause of Helen's death was a lack of oxygen due to suffocation. Ian allegedly smothered his wife, who had fallen asleep from a large dose of sleeping pills, with a pillow or pulled a bag over her head, gradually reducing air access until she died. On February 22, 2017, Ian Stewart was found guilty of the planned murder of Helen Bailey. He was sentenced to 34 years in prison, which at his age was effectively equivalent to a life sentence. The only way 94-year-old Ian could be released was if he lived to see another day. However, the story did not end there. When the verdict became known to the couple's friends, one of them exclaimed, "He killed them both!" And they were not talking about Helen and Boris, but about Bailey and Ian's first wife, Diana. The investigator himself also thought about this version. Earlier in the investigation of Helen's murder, Ian's testimony had not provided any clues to Diana's death 7 years earlier. He completely denied any involvement and said that his wife had allegedly died of an epileptic seizure. Ian claimed that when he returned home from the store and opened the gate, he saw his wife convulsing on the driveway. He allegedly immediately called an ambulance, but resuscitation efforts failed, and Diana was pronounced dead of an epileptic seizure. However, when the circumstances were re-examined, several suspicious details emerged. First, Ian called the emergency services only 12 minutes after his wife's death, although he claimed that he had called for help immediately. And he made the call already knowing that Diana was dead, although he claimed during the call that she was still alive. Secondly, the results of a thorough forensic examination of Diana's brain, which was donated for scientific purposes in her will, revealed an extremely low probability of death from epilepsy, less than 1 case per 100,000. Instead, the more likely cause was asphyxiation, suffocation. Diana's life was also insured for $1 million, which could have been a motive for Ian. In 2020, the verdict was announced for this crime as well: guilty. Now Ian has lost his freedom forever. For 2 cold-blooded murders of his wives, he will never be released again. In the end, the terrible secret was revealed thanks to Helen's decision to become an organ donor after her death. As it turned out later, it was her openness and willingness to help science that helped to establish the true cause of the woman's death and punish the killer. The story of solving these horrific crimes really resembles the plot of a thriller movie or novel. However, unfortunately, these are real-life events that make you think. As always, after telling the true crime stories, I draw some conclusions and share my thoughts with you, dear readers. I can't help but note that Helen Bailey's life was full of both the joys of creativity and hardships, such as the loss of her child, her husband, and her fight against illness. However, even in the most tragic moments, such as during a vacation in Barbados, the woman remained optimistic and faithful to the future, preparing for a vacation with a new, beautiful swimsuit. And that's when fate cruelly separated her from her beloved husband and future dreams. This painful experience soaked up all the emotional contrasts like a sponge, from the peak of happiness to the abyss of grief. Helen was able to survive these shocks with dignity, reflecting them on the pages of her own book. Her pain and loneliness also found an outlet in her frank blog posts, which helped other people who had also suffered losses. Perhaps it was this openness and sincere willingness to share her most intimate secrets that led to a fatal mistake: excessive trust in her new husband, Ian, whom she had known for a short time.